The information shared in this podcast and related media is intended to provide broad consumer understanding and knowledge of healthcare topics as they pertain to remote work. All content herein is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Further, this information should not be used in place of a visit, call, consultation, or advice of your physician or other healthcare provider. The owners of this content do not recommend the self-management of health problems. Should you have any healthcare-related questions, please call or see your physician or other healthcare provider promptly. You should never disregard medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have seen or heard on this podcast or read in related media. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor, seek professional help, or call 911 immediately.
Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast Mental Health Series. I'm your host, Ryan Roghaar. The purpose of this series is to destigmatize the mental health issues commonly found in the remote work community. We have partnered with doctors, therapists, counselors, and other mental health professionals for a series of in-depth discussions on a broad range of topics, ranging from isolation and depression to crafting meaningful relationships with others, and maybe more importantly, with ourselves. Our guest experts will share their insights in order to arm teams and leaders with the tools they need to thrive now and in the future. Mental health has always been a relevant issue for remote workers, freelancers, and distributed teams. But in today's climate, the subject is becoming more and more pertinent each and every day. I look forward to sharing this valuable information with you, and please join the conversation online, on the socials, or wherever the audience most suited to hear it can get involved. Before we get started, as always, today's show is brought to you by TeamMadeApart.com. Team Made Apart features articles, tools, and resources designed to teach remote workers and those who hire them how to work better together. A community for owners, managers, leaders, freelancers, contractors, and all variety of remote worker, Team Made Apart is also a terrific resource for companies interested in implementing remote work policies in otherwise co-located environments, or for those planning to build fully distributed organizations from the jump. Listeners of this podcast have an exciting opportunity to get involved in the remote work revolution. In light of current events related to the coronavirus pandemic and a sudden worldwide shift to remote work, we're offering a free remote work best practices guide for leaders who find themselves struggling to create a remote work policy in a pinch. Now, and for the duration of the crisis, visit teammadeapart.com/crisis to not only download your free Team Made Apart Remote Policy Primer, how to write remote work policies that don't suck, but to find other tools and resources to help you weather the storm. Great working relationships make for great remote work experiences, and with this free guide, you'll be better equipped to do your part in creating and maintaining a happy and sustainable remote life. Once again, to take advantage of this collection of useful resources, please visit teammadeapart.com/crisis, that is teammadeapart.com/crisis, to download your free Best Practices Guide. Today's special guest is psychologist, psychiatrist, and digital nomad, Dr. Sonia Jaeger. Through her fully online private practice, Sonia offers a unique perspective that caters specifically to the needs of expats, remote workers, and digital nomads. From points unknown, Dr. Jaeger engages with her clients where they are by email and video chat to help them navigate a broad range of mental health concerns, from depression and isolation to cultural and relationship issues, all in her native German, French, and English. Joining us today to discuss some surprising problems found in remote working populations and how to work through them, embracing fluidity in life and work, career pivots, resilience, and so much more, please join me in welcoming to the show Dr. Sonia Jaeger. Hi, Sonia. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
I am thrilled to death. So I came to know you or become aware of you through a mutual acquaintance, a person named Allie Green. She has been a guest on our other podcast, as well as, she and I have done numerous things together. So when she heard that I was doing this mental health show, she made some introductions to people who she thought might be great. And you have a unique set of experiences that really, are highly specialized to the digital nomad or to the remote worker. And so I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, so let's start, I guess, a little bit maybe by getting into your background and sort of discussing, what it is that makes you different from our sort of run-of-the-mill counselor.
Well, probably the fact that I've been a digital nomad for almost 6 years now. So, that's not that common among us therapists. I'm not the only one, but not that many. So my background is that I'm French and German. I studied psychology. I did my psychotherapy training in Germany, did my PhD, and then decided to take a break before opening my private practice, but instead just kept traveling, basically. So I opened my practice online, and I've been working online for 4 or 5 years now, counseling mostly German and French expats.
Yeah.
Online, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. Well, and especially now, I mean, how well were you set up for COVID? Obviously, I mean, when the world went remote, you were already there. So that's pretty great experience. I think it's really interesting too. I mean, it does seem, I mean, it's particularly interesting that you have this background in sort of digital nomadetry, or whatever we want to call it, because, obviously, I think so much of being a good therapist or understanding this, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I have a naive approach, but I think so much of it is being able to sort of empathize with people and understand what they're working through. And having worked remote yourself, I'm sure have encountered many of the same kinds of problems or the same sorts of issues that come up for your standard remote worker.
Definitely, and I can see that my clients are coming to me because they can probably know that I'm not going to tell them, well, you should just move back to your home country and that will fix all of your problems, like maybe their families and some friends are telling them. So definitely understanding or having lived it, living it myself definitely helps. But I don't think you need to, have experienced everything as a therapist to be able to help someone work through it, but can't hurt either.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think it's probably just that extra layer of connection, because for somebody without that experience, they might be quick to just do exactly like you said, maybe send them back home or, choose something that maybe seems like a safe path. When in reality, you can go, no, I understand this. And it just sort of gives you that extra layer of knowledge, I suppose.
Definitely. That's definitely like, especially among my digital nomad clients, that's a huge thing. The other thing is also like the multicultural aspect. Most of my clients have some kind of cross-cultural background or experience in the traveling or the living in different countries, and having that myself from my own background, but also the way I'm living, that kind of connection is definitely really helpful.
Well, and especially as the world continues to shrink and people are working all over the planet with people from so many different cultures and so many different backgrounds, I can imagine there are a lot of sort of cross-cultural issues. I had a conversation recently with somebody who does work in the refugee space, who's trying to help refugees leverage remote work as a way to find, elevate themselves from their current situation. And she was saying that was one of the bigger issues, like for these people, they're largely Middle Eastern, her group, they couldn't really, or they didn't have as much knowledge of, like, let's say American culture or European culture as, some other people. Like if you're maybe born and raised in London and you're doing work for a US company, it's probably not that big of a stretch. But culturally, for a person in the Middle East, working for maybe an American company, or even within the United States, an East Coast company versus a West Coast company or something, like there's a lot of cultural differences that you might just not admit, you might miss. It's
true, but it's actually interesting, the example you just gave. Because in my experience, the one between the UK and the US, or between the UK, Australia, or other things between, different Latin American countries or Spanish-speaking countries, my experience is, in the end, it's even more complicated because you don't expect culture to be such a big topic. Whereas if you, work with someone from a completely different culture, it's going to be an issue, and you're going to address those issues, and you're going to, look into how to work with that. But if you're like, well, we speak the same language, we have roughly the same background, and then that's where like a lot of issues actually arise because it's not the same.
Oh, interesting. That's a great observation. I love that. Can you talk about, like, let's maybe start getting into a little bit of what you're finding in your practice. Like, what are you seeing as common problems that people are coming to you with? I mean, there's obviously the list, the short list of the really common ones, right? There's sort of the anxieties and the depressions and the isolationism and things like this that are pretty common among remote workers. But are there anything specific that you're observing, that are either unique to the digital nomad lifestyle, and maybe it even makes sense to sort of define that lifestyle a little bit for people who don't understand the differences? But I mean, is there anything specific or unique that you're coming across in your practice?
I think the two big topics that I would say are unique are the identity lifestyle crisis kind of topic, because especially among digital nomads, it's so much more than just a way of living. It becomes your whole identity for many people, or it's the thing you were dreaming of. And then well, what if you realize it's maybe not that great for you, or you need more stability, or you want a change? Can you still call yourself a digital nomad? How does that work? You have to then tell people, well, actually, maybe this is not really fully me. And especially if you've been like kind of selling a dream, which is sadly a huge thing among digital nomads, it's quite tricky to have that disconnect between what your daily life is like, spending way too many hours in front of your laptop, probably, especially if you're a beginner digital nomad, in a shitty hostel room or like, a crappy Airbnb. And then you post those fancy pictures on Instagram that pretend that you have this amazing lifestyle. And that kind of like disconnect and conflict is a huge topic. And the identity in general, also working with expats and people in different cultures, the question of like, who am I and what culture do I belong to and what life do I want to live? Because it's great to be adventurous and go out there into the world and live a different life. But then is that really who you are? And is that all you are? And how much of that, how does that affect your life and your mental health in the end? And the other big topic on top of identity questions would be family issues, because I think that a lot of people do become digital nomads because they're trying to leave something behind and then realize that no matter how far you are from your family, you're not going to really get rid of them and the issues you might have. And so a lot of people come to me saying, well, yeah, I'm ready to face those things. I want to work through some stuff that happened in my life, or, a complicated relationship to a family member or something like that. And especially if you live somewhere else and then you visit them, you're going to be full-time with them for much longer than you usually would see them if you were just living, in the same city. Mm-hmm. So that also often increases issues that people have with their friends and families.
Yeah, I'd like to dig in a little bit on that identity lifestyle bit. I think that is so true, right? I mean, for people kind of on the outside, you see these images of people with their toes in the sand and they're on their laptop or whatever. And I mean, they really do paint this picture. And I think it has unfortunately done a little bit of a disservice to these guys. But one of the things that has sort of occurred to me over the series of doing these podcasts, especially these mental health shows, is sort of the fluidity of nature and the fluidity of life, and how sort of accepting fluidity it can maybe be a tool that people could use, to try and overcome these identity issues. Because I think so much of it is trying to fit a label or trying to make sure that you're checking a box. The expectation of a digital nomad is this. Therefore, if I'm not achieving that, then I'm not doing the right thing. And like you mentioned, people who sort of, maybe they try it out and they find out it's not working for them, or, whatever, but they're so committed to making sure they fit that title that they might even do so kind of at their own detriment, instead of sort of, I guess, embracing that fluidity and understanding what was good for us today isn't good for us tomorrow, maybe.
For sure. And I mean, when you look at how digital nomads live, especially those that are very active on social media and promoting the lifestyle, I mean, they say they chose this lifestyle. They say they chose the lifestyle for, because they wanted to be free and be able to go anywhere and travel and do all of those things. But then they're all in Chiang Mai or in Bali or, in one of those other hubs for digital nomads, and nothing against them, they're nice. But that to me doesn't sound like freedom. If all you're doing is recreating basically what you had just somewhere else, and especially if you're only doing it in a cheap country and in a, how much freedom is in there, and embracing the fact that everything you choose will also have some negatives. Whether it's the digital nomad lifestyle is amazing and I love it, but it's not perfect. Nothing is. And we change, like you said, we can change, and maybe tomorrow we'll realize, well, I would like to have a home base and only travel a few months a year, or just work from home and be a remote worker in my own city.
Yeah. And I think that's so true, right? I mean, I think understanding, sort of the differences and being adaptable that way, or being sort of resilient and able to, transition to these different phases of our lives or our different interests is pretty critical. And it seems like, and it's funny because like, I always joke because I come from a freelance design background. I'm a creative director by trade. And, but I've worked remotely in my own business, on and off for 20, 25 years at this point. And so I've been working remotely for a long time. And when I started the business, I was working for a lot of musical groups. I tour managed and road managed different bands. And so I was starting my company from the back of the tour bus, where I was working and making concert posters and things like that. And, my whole career, like really until just earlier this year when we formally launched our company, when we launched Team Made Apart, I was calling myself a digital nomad because I felt like I worked digitally and I was nomadic. I was traveling around the country and I was working digitally. It wasn't until I really got into this space that I started to understand the differences, the sort of the cultural or the lifestyle differences. I was a digital nomad, but I have a family at home. I have a mortgage. I have, all these things. And, but so the life that I'm living isn't what you would call, wouldn't necessarily check the boxes of the digital nomad. And so I think that it's important, I guess, sort of make that distinction or help people understand sort of what the difference is between sort of that nomadic lifestyle where we're jumping hostel to hostel, project to project, versus, I guess, standard remote worker who works for Facebook or Twitter or something from, their house in Indiana or something.
Well, I think that's where I notice within the digital nomad community, how there are kind of those two groups, those who say, yeah, that's exactly the reason why I'm not calling myself a digital nomad, because I don't want to be associated with those people who are selling a dream and pretending to do whatever. And I'm more of the fraction of like, let's reclaim that word. Like, I'm happy to call myself a digital nomad, but it doesn't mean I have to spend all of my time in Chiang Mai. I don't even like it there. I mean, the food is great and the massages are cheap, but it's not a great city to be in. And I want to be someone who can, decide to go to my home country if I want for a while, or I spent 2 months in Japan last year, or like a couple of months in New Zealand. Mm. And so many digital nomads would be like, well, but I can't afford that. Well, then you're maybe not setting up your life right and your business right, because if you want the freedom, for me, that's part of the freedom. Maybe it's not for them, but definitely looking into making this a sustainable and long-term thing. And that's why I think that so many digital nomads only do it for a very short time. And
well, it seems like so much of it too has to do with sort of age and sort of our natural evolution as a human, just sort of the phases that we go through as we grow. Like I say, I began life tour managing and running around the country and doing all these things in my 20s. But by my 30s, like, I'd be too tired. Like, I just want to go to bed. I don't want to be doing that crap anymore, And so it's kind of that thing. And I think as we sort of progress, and it's not necessarily about children or whatever, but if you have kids or if you start to establish a family or if you begin laying down roots in a particular area or something, then the, I guess, thrill of this jumping city to city to city gets more and more difficult, because you do require a little stability. Like I am a big Spain fan. And so I try and get over to Spain as often as I possibly can. And, if I had my druthers, we'd move there, we'd live there, we'd be out there on the beach doing our thing. But I can't sit and go back and forth because I have a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old who are in school and I'm sort of beholden to their school schedules. So as much as I would love to be more nomadic, I don't have the ability to do that right now. And so I think that part of the sort of nomad culture is recognizing some of that stuff. And I think you see probably, and maybe you can affirm this or back it up, is I imagine there's a fair bit of burnout and sort of, issues in and around that idea of getting, all this emotional baggage, all this extra stress, all this extra stuff because they don't have any money, they're living in bad conditions, maybe they're not sleeping well, all these kinds of things. And, you can be pretty resilient or pretty tolerant when you're 22. But when you're, 41, it gets a little trickier.
And I think it's that. And I think it's also the question of what comes first? Like, is it just about the lifestyle, or is it about also like your work and your career and your passion, whatever in life, whatever it is? But I found a way to just do what I would have been doing anyway. And what I was doing before, just do it online. Like, for me, the life and the work are kind of two separate things. I mean, they go well together and I've made them go well together, but, I can be wherever and still do what I'm doing. And with the pandemic, everyone suddenly manages to do what I'm doing. All of the therapists who thought they could never work online suddenly had to and realized it's not that bad, actually. But I don't need the lifestyle to, it doesn't have to be together. Like, my work does not have to be connected to the way I'm living. And I think so many people are like, well, I want this lifestyle. What can I do? What skills do I need? What kind of job can I find? And sure, you can do that for a while, but do you really want to be that freelancer going from job to job forever? Doesn't sound like a very long-term sustainable thing for most people.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And, and it's interesting, you say this sort of separation, for the longest time in my career, and even now to some extent, as I bounce around and I work from all places, I spend a lot of time trying to keep it as seamless and as quiet as possible. Like I don't even want my clients to know I've left. And so this idea that, like so I certainly don't put a lot of emphasis on the fact that I'm traveling or that I'm out of town. I don't want to shake my clients' confidence, for example. I want them to know that work's getting done. And, oh, wow, you were in Spain for 6 weeks? Like, how'd that work? And so I try not to make a big deal out of that thing. And I think that it, is, I think to your point, that it's pretty easy to fizzle out quickly if you're, I guess, overworking and, really focused on this whole movement and trying to jump around and all this stuff at the same time. I think, I can imagine that becomes a little chaotic.
And I have some colleagues who do it more like you, who just basically don't tell anyone where they are. And then it's just, oh, it's dark where you are. Where are you? Like, when it's like different time zone or something like that. On video calls, you do notice that kind of thing sometimes when the light isn't the same. But I've embraced the, using it for my marketing, basically. So I do combine my lifestyle and my work in that way. But if I decide tomorrow to stop traveling, I don't think it's going to be really a problem because, I will still find ways to live that kind of freedom and different life that I want on my terms.
Yeah. Well, and so when you started your practice, did you ever work like one-on-one in person with people, or did you just go directly to working remotely?
So I worked back in Germany. I worked in psychiatries and hospitals, and for my psychotherapy training, you have to do 600 hours of one-on-one psychotherapy with patients in a private practice. So I did that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, the reason I asked was I wondered how sort of, your current lifestyle that you're living sort of by choice, but also just sort of the pandemic's effect and where everybody has now gone remotely. Do you notice as a therapist any difference or some, maybe distinct differences in the relationships that you have with your clients? Maybe their ability to open up, is it better or worse? Or, is there something missing from not getting that in-person touch anymore?
I do miss it. And there are things missing, but there are other things that are great as well. So I think there's both. I do miss the shared physical experience of the space you're in. Like if there's a weird noise here, you don't know what it is. You're not experiencing it in the same way with me as if, we were here in something false or whatever. And that whole, seeing the whole body, I'm not sure about how happy or bad it is, but not smelling people. Sometimes that can be quite an indicator of stuff. So, but then I'm really happy that I can just eat as much garlic as I want. And I do think that people open up very easily online, but then those who come to me are those who also choose to work online and on video. So it's not people who had to do it. So I think that's where with the pandemic, it's been quite different because people have been pushed into it and they didn't choose it for the therapist and for the client. And for me, one thing that I found tricky is to switch between roles. So I've sometimes seen people in person because I happen to be in the city they're in, for example. And I find that switching from face-to-face to online works quite well as a therapist, but switching from online to face-to-face is really difficult. So I try to avoid that. But if we have, for example, the first session in person, if that's possible, I've done that a few times, then moving on to online really works very well if we know it and if it's planned and we choose it. But yeah, if we had been talking like this for a while and then we happen to be in the same city and we meet in a private practice and we see the whole body and you're like, it's just different. So it's not going to be the same type of session. So yeah, I stopped doing that. And then I can't meet my clients for coffee anyway. So, that also doesn't happen. But I do find it also interesting that you get to see people in their natural, habitat and in their home and where they feel safe. And you get to see their dog and their baby and, all of that. And as a therapist, that can be really interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, I could imagine that there might be some issue, and maybe this isn't real, but I'm just trying to make up things or trying to, speak what I'm observing. But one thought is that people might sort of behave a certain way online or on screen that maybe is a little bit outside of their normal character. And so I wonder if you're seeing sort of a clear picture of somebody, for example, I mean, I am largely introverted. I, would much prefer to not be on camera. I embrace it as something I have to do as part of my work, and I slog it out. but I don't like it. But when I'm sitting here on camera with you, I have to sort of put on this air that, oh yeah, I'm totally comfortable. I'm good doing this. When in reality, in the back of my head, I'm going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And so I wonder if, maybe people are more comfortable in their homes, so they're not putting on this air. But I just wonder if you're seeing people, and maybe this could be part of that difference you see when you do finally meet them in person or whatever, is that, they've been able to, I guess, sort of paint a picture of themselves one way that lives through this screen. And then when you see their body language, you can go, oh, okay, well, the way you were behaving, you're full of crap. Like I could tell that there's actually something else going on here, but I couldn't see your hand twitching while we were talking or whatever.
I actually think that people have a harder time being themselves face to face, at least to start with, because you go into that office, you are in that foreign space, you don't understand how things are working, and that adds quite a bit of a layer to it. So yes, I might see the foot moving, but then I'm also like, well, this is also a really awkward, different, weird situation to be in, because not everyone goes to the therapist all the time. And so if you're doing it for the first time, it's going to be quite a big deal. You have to find the place, you have to go inside, you have to know which chair to sit on, know whether you shake their hands or not, all of those small things can make it quite difficult for people to start therapy. And that's where being on a video call makes things easier, also because you feel like you could leave any time without being punished. Physically leaving a room is quite a big thing to do, but just shutting this down, and then I guess the internet stopped working, you didn't have a good excuse. They don't do it. It's not something that happens very often, but having that kind of safety helps people, I think, to be more natural. And in the end, you see quite a bit. It also depends on how people set up their screen. Sometimes you see quite a bit of the body because they're sitting on their bed and the laptop is in front of them, and you see them moving around. And so you do get quite a bit. But what is missing in the end, I don't know if it's missing, but what is helpful and also a thing is that because you are in your own home, you don't have that separation from your regular life, So whereas if you go into that private practice, that's a special space for it. So we have to recreate that safe space on Zoom. And that's a bit different from having that physical space that you go to. And then also you don't have the before and after, the driving there or taking the bus or riding your bike or whatever to go there and then go back home or to work. If you're just coming out of a meeting or you just had a fight with your child or your partner and then you talk to me and then they're waiting or they're knocking on the door because they're want something, that can obviously make it harder.
Yeah, well, and I imagine... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, and then that's why lots of people talk to me from their cars.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, and I think, there's probably something too, also when you're doing a lot of heavy, mental work, that you take a little bit of time, before to prepare. And when you leave to sort of, I guess, absorb or work through the things that you talked about and just go through that dialogue in your head a little bit, oh, I said this, or golly, maybe I should have said this, or I could have thought that, and it seems like as part of the process, you would want a little bit of that sort of ramp up and ramp back down time, just to sort of make it stick, I would think.
Yeah, and I think it's just more that I think that you need to create it for yourself, and it's not a thing that happens naturally.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that makes sense. So, all right. So we talked about this a little bit, but I think I saw this on your website that one of the bigger things that people struggle with is decision making. And so we sort of talked about that a little bit with this identity lifestyle design, the fact that people are slipping into and out of making decisions and, all these kinds of struggles that are going around that. But I wonder if we could dig into that topic a little bit, because I think that that's something that's true, not just among the digital nomads out there, but among remote workers and probably among humans in general. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about sort of decision making, what makes it so challenging and what we can do to maybe start to take a little bit of that back.
Well, I think one of the biggest ones that I see in my work, so maybe I should explain that my typical client is a woman around 30 who is single or just in a shitty relationship and is kind of facing that, what do I want for my life, and children, no children, partner kind of thing. So that's where decision making obviously is especially complicated, because there's that aspect of, well, I guess I can't have it all. But especially young women today, we grew up thinking, knowing, everyone told us you can have it all. You can have the great career, you can have the great lifestyle, you can have your family, you can have all of that. And then at some point reality hits and you realize, well, maybe not. And things haven't changed that much. I mean, you see it with the pandemic, how it's still the women who do all of the childcare and housework and all of that. And so that's a huge one where decision questions come into my work. But obviously that's like a huge kind of like decision thing. And then there's more the smaller stuff, like, do I keep that job? Do I leave that job? Do I move to a new city? Do I do this? And I think we have so many options that we're kind of lost. And I think that's something that happens quite a lot. And that's where a lot of my clients are like, I kind of like envy my friends from school who never moved, who never went anywhere else, and who just always knew that they would marry someone from that city and they would stay there and they have their small kind of settled life. And in some ways they envy them, and in some ways they could never live like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can sort of echo that feeling. I mean, as I said, I've been more or less, freelance or digital or, self-employed anyway, my entire career, outside of a couple of brief stints here and there with, little companies. But largely I've been on my own my whole time. And sometimes I look at my family, I look at, my in-laws or whomever, they've got good jobs, they've got a steady paycheck, and I'm like, well, maybe we'll get paid this month. I don't know. And, now in general, the rewards have far outweighed the risks. Generally we make we make good money, we have freedom to move about, we can, take a lot more autonomy than the guy who has the day job. But still secretly, I look at them and I go, well, God, it'd be nice if, if I just knew I was getting paid every month. Like that would be one nice thing to not worry about. And so as it pertains to decision making, and, I had mentioned to you that sort of our focus is relationships. I wonder if we could maybe dig in a little bit on that and sort of the relationships, and maybe they're different for digital nomads. So this might be kind of an interesting space to explore. When I talk to your normal remote workers, maybe they have a team at the office that they're working with, or maybe they have, a team of distributed workers, but they're all sort of working with the same people. And there's kind of these relationships that start to form and bonds and things like that. I imagine for a lot of remote or digital nomads, the true digital nomads anyway, they might be more project-based, doing, freelance thing here and there. And so I wonder, what kinds of relationship issues are they dealing with? Like, you mentioned, for young women especially, they've got family concerns and sort of environmental pressures and social pressures and things like this. But are you seeing anything unique to the digital nomad community in terms of the kinds of relationships they're making? Like, I assume we seek relationships for a little bit of stability.
I think we do. I think one of the problems that digital nomads have, and sometimes also people who just move to a new city, or is that, it's easy to focus on the new shiny relationship, like meeting that new person and you hit it off and it's amazing and you do lots of stuff together, but you kind of forget your old friends and those that you should maybe also keep in touch. And especially if you have, friends who are not digital nomads, keeping in touch with them and having a routine and being intentional about doing it, even though maybe your lifestyles are different, I think is really important. And then having those local friends and those that you are doing something with day to day, wherever you are right now, but then also your digital nomad community. There are amazing communities out there for digital nomads, and I'm in some of them, and we don't see each other all the time. But keeping in touch with them outside of events and outside of like the one conference a year where we meet, trying to have that kind of like more than just a Facebook post and a comment on Instagram, like, and actually like talking to them and meeting them and organizing events and having those online interactions, I think is something that a lot of people kind of forget for a while when they get caught in the, this is an amazing new lifestyle and it's all exciting and everything is new and shiny and my work is super demanding because I'm just starting a new business. And I think that's where like the more experienced digital nomads are a lot better, like maintaining their relationships. And I think a tricky one is also the like friends from back home, and I feel like that's where like the digital nomad kind of has to do the work, because we are the ones who left. And we're the ones who, when we come back, like getting over that, oh no, you tell me all of the amazing things you experienced, my life is boring. It's not true. Your life is not boring. You experience things. I want to hear about them. But it's easy to get to be that like invited guest who just like tells all the fun story and the exciting and exotic stuff. So trying to go past that and really going a bit deeper into relationships, I think is something that a lot of digital nomads struggle with.
Yeah, well, and maybe as an extension of that, I mean, it's not something I explore a lot in the work I'm doing, but it occurs to me. I mean, as I mentioned at the sort of, top of that last question, this idea that we might seek relationships for stability. So it does make sense to kind of go back to our rocks, right? Go back to the people who've been there our whole lives, or whatever, our childhood friends, or whoever we're still close to from our home city or home country, and so that makes a lot of sense to me. But how do digital nomads deal with like matters of sort of romantic relationships and things like that? Like, I mean, I know for me, like my partner is a big part of my day, right? I mean, like, she's there when I get up, she's there, when I stop for lunch and all that kind of stuff. And even though I like to think of myself as supremely independent, when I'm gone for a long time, I notice the differences, right? And so for somebody who's sort of always on the move, what role do sort of a romantic or not, maybe just really close friendship type relationships, like how do those work for the digital nomad community?
Well, it's interesting because you could think that it would be easy for digital nomads because they can just both move together, like you just need to meet another digital nomad and then you can just go and keep doing your thing and do it together. But a lot of digital nomads actually have a partner who's not nomadic. And so they have a home base where that partner is, and then they travel more and the partner comes with them sometimes. But it seems to be a really difficult topic, the dating among nomads. And there are actually some there's a new podcast about dating as a nomad. There's like stuff from my friends who've been starting those kind of things because they find it really, really hard to find someone who understands the lifestyle and who understands them. But while digital nomads say they are super flexible and willing to adapt, and that's a core of their being, I think they're not. Because if you meet someone great, well, maybe you need to adapt a little bit, or maybe you need to figure it out, and maybe you can't just keep doing that kind of like me first all the time lifestyle. So, and I think that's where like the question of like, what does freedom really mean? And does freedom mean that I'm just doing whatever I want all the time, or does freedom mean that I'm also willing to adapt and change and evolve, and whether it's settling or whether it's a partner or whether it's something else?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point because, I mean, obviously if I can imagine, I mean, my wife happens to stay particularly busy. So when I'm out of town, it's like kind of a gift because she doesn't have to worry about me. She's busy. But for in a lot of relationships, I could understand, if you're the one sitting at home while your partner is off flitting around Europe or, taking those pictures with their toes in the sand while they're working on their laptops, I imagine that could breed some sort of hostility or negative feelings and things, some jealousy, things like that. And so I can imagine it would be a difficult thing. To sort of keep this idea, in this realm of decision-making, I wanted to talk a little bit about decision-making as it pertains to anxiety. So anxiety is one of these things that I sort of include in the holy trinity of remote work problems, right? And I think anxiety can come from a lot of directions, like we've talked about with digital nomads specifically. Maybe some of it comes from lack of stability, from moving around a lot. Maybe there's, some other reasons. But I wonder if you could talk about sort of decision-making's role in our anxiety and how maybe we can sort of stem some of our anxiety by becoming better decision makers.
Well, I can definitely see among my clients that there's a huge fear of making the wrong decision. And that kind of like this idea that you have to, whatever you decide, it has to be the perfect decision and the perfect answer, and the, kind of like also idea that this is it forever, which is weird because we really live in a world where you can change your work and your lifestyle and that quite often if you really wanted to. But it's always like, oh, I know I need to change this in my life. I need to find a new job, or I need to leave this city, or I need to leave this partner. But then if I do that, will I ever find something new, and what will happen? And I need to first decide and first like spend a lot of time finding the perfect answer, and then I can do that thing. And there's just no perfect solution to life. So embracing that and being like, well, I'm going to try it. And if it doesn't work, then I can still change it again. Could be really useful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And what happens otherwise is that life makes that decision for you. And that's also not that helpful.
Yeah, it's probably not usually that fun when you just can't afford rent anymore, so you have to go home, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that, though? I think the key word in there that you brought up was fear, this idea of fear, and how even though we might feel like we're really comfortable in our skin and we're moving here and there, maybe some of this anxiety is coming from sort of this fear of the unknown. When you're working with clients or just sort of in your own head, how do you, I guess, contend with some of this fear? I mean, I think it's perfectly natural, right? It's probably based in some kind of survival instinct or something, and not knowing what's around the corner, is, I guess, putting you at risk. But, are there tactics or anything that we could be using to maybe sort of ease some of those fears?
As a digital nomad, stop moving to the next city as a solution and stay for a while and face that fear? Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what basically the pandemic did for many people, right? They for digital nomads especially, they took away your coping mechanism, because for a lot of digital nomads, going to that city and having that new start is what kind of helps. And I love it. It motivates me. I love that fresh start. It's great. But I also don't use it just as a means to avoid my anxieties and other mental health issues. And that's where it's been really interesting to see how people who were forced to stay in a place, I mean, under very difficult circumstances, obviously, were reacting to that, because you could have expected that digital nomads are pretty well equipped to handle a global pandemic compared to many people who had to change everything in their life. We just had to stop traveling. Mm-hmm. Our work's already set up like that. We already have all of our online communities, our online friends and things, but the number of digital nomads who have been struggling the last few months has been very high. And I think it's a lot of that. It's that kind of like not being used to having to face your feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I sort of feel like too, it's maybe one of these things, and maybe it's just particularly prominent here in the States, but it's sort of this, we've sort of lost some autonomy, this ability to sort of move at will. And it doesn't even have that much to do with needing to move necessarily, as much as it has to do with, well, now I can't. I used to be able to just come freely and do what I wanted to, but now I can't. And I think maybe that again imposes some fear or some sort of something where look how quickly this was taken from me. I went from being totally autonomous and able to move around to not being able to do any of that. And so what does that mean for my greater future? So I think that could be a scary issue. So sort of as like maybe the third leg of this decision-making topic, I wanted to talk about sort of imposter syndrome. I think that this is probably something, and we sort of touched on it earlier on with the sort of, digital nomads who are the toes in the sand type versus the ones that are just moving around doing their work. But imposter syndrome, especially for, as I say, I sort of come from a freelance background and have spent a lot of time doing sort of project work. And so much of the work we're doing, I don't know what it is that's sort of inherent to creative people, especially, but they just don't seem to have this confidence in themselves. So anytime they're putting themselves out there as, the expert or the whatever, they're always struggling with this bit, am I really that expert? Am I really that good? And it seems to me that part of it is, making a decision and sticking to it. And maybe if you were to take that another degree, maybe it's developing confidence and sort of in you and what you're doing. And so I wonder if you'd maybe explore that topic a little bit and just sort of talk about how it manifests in sort of your audience, but then also sort of generally from a therapist perspective.
I can go even further and tell you an example of my own life. Like I started working online and I put my website online saying that I'm doing online counseling. And before I had my first client, I had a colleague reaching out to me asking, oh, that's amazing what you're doing. How can you teach me how to do that? And I'm like, I can't teach you how to do it. I haven't started doing it myself. Now, years later, I have started coaching colleagues and I have, and run a community for location independent therapists and do all of that. But it's taken me a really long time to accept that I am an expert in this. I do not feel like an expert at all. When I talk to someone who's just starting, I realize, well, I'm definitely more of an expert than I was 5 years ago, and then someone who's never done that. But it's a tricky one to embrace that kind of knowledge, and especially the word expert. I find it's like such a loaded word. I find it really tricky to embrace and to be like, yeah, sure, I am the expert. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is really just that kind of difference between what you're putting out there and the feeling that you have to tell people that you are amazing to sell something. And I don't think that's true. I think you can be a lot more authentic and real, and that's what I'm doing, and it's working really well. I'm not doing those overnight, I'm selling you the dream and you're going to get the overnight success. No, I'm telling them it's going to be hard, it's going to take time, but I can help you, and point you to some stuff to get there. But I think that's where like the imposter syndrome for a lot of the people I work with come in, is when you feel like you have to oversell. And that's especially something that happens online, right? Because you have to be selling something amazing to be successful, which isn't true, but which is what everyone's going to tell you. But imposter syndrome is such a huge topic, and so many people have it. One of the things that I do a lot with my clients is to, collect all of the positive feedback that you've gotten, have that like folder with all of the reviews, the nice messages, the things you've accomplished, and then in bad times, look at it, or just have like, create a list of all the things you've achieved in your life, the hard stuff that you've conquered, the stuff that you've, somehow managed against odds, and use that to remind yourself of, you don't have to know it all, but you have already accomplished a lot. And life is tough. We don't have to get rid of anxiety before living. We can live and have anxiety. And we can also do stuff to reduce it, obviously. But
Sure.
I think that's one of the things with the decision and the anxiety, again, is that idea that you have to first get rid of the anxiety, or you have to first get rid of the problem, and then you can make the perfect decision. And reality is that, we can live and be anxious at the same time.
Yeah, no, I love that as a theory, or like, the way that you framed it, because I think that is such a challenge for people. Even in my own life, I've definitely been guilty of putting off something because the conditions weren't just right. I even have told other people, that are about my age, whether they're starting to have children or not, like, there's always like, oh, well, I'll have kids when X, Y, and Z are met, or when these different criteria happen. And in me and my wife's experience, we had the same attitude. We weren't going to have kids, but then wait, we're pregnant all of a sudden. And so I guess we're having a kid. And what I found, or in that moment, it occurs to me that, A, we're not in control. So stop pretending like we own it. And then second of all, like there's never a right time, but you will grow, adapt, and get, you'll rise to the occasion. You're not suddenly going to be, in a really bad situation. Now it might take a little more work, or things might have to change or whatever, but you will adapt and you'll change. And so, but I think it all maybe goes back to this idea of fear that we were discussing earlier. So it's interesting around sort of this idea of imposter syndrome. It's interesting, the example you gave. In my experience also, I've been doing this for 25 years, all this stuff, but we just launched our remote work business in January, and ultimately launched our website and our podcast in March. And then like a week later, the world went remote, right? And so, and maybe it's just sort of my moral proclivities, but I wasn't allowed, I didn't want to roll out the business as a business because I didn't want to look opportunistic. So we didn't even start listing services or anything until about a month ago, because I didn't want to come off the wrong way to people. And so we just became a resource or a platform for people. So we do this podcast for free. We share this information with everybody. And the idea is that, we're really giving back to the greater community. But like, even though I've been doing this thing, this working remote thing for 20 years, if you asked me if I was an expert on it, I would tell you absolutely not. So it's funny that that's sort of the shared experience. But I would argue, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would argue that having that trepidation around calling yourself the expert or the be all end all might actually be the healthier way to be. Like, if you're the guy that knows you're the be all end all, you're probably not. And you're also wildly abrasive, and most people don't want to be around you. And so I think it may actually be healthier, this little, whatever it is, maybe it's a check and a balance that's sort of built into our system that keeps us from, letting our ego get completely out of control. So, but I did want to talk to you about, for me in particular, and this is sort of my experience, I don't know if it's everyone's experience, but for me, I rely a lot on others for affirmation of the work I'm doing. So like, I will often get caught up in sort of, negative self-talk, or I'm wrapped up being critical of the work I'm doing. I'm notorious for saying, oh, I'll never achieve anything. I've never done anything. But then somebody will come behind me and be like, oh my God, that's amazing. I can't believe you do this and that. And then it's like, okay, cool, I'm good for a minute. And then I need somebody else to affirm me again. And so I wondered if that, if you could discuss sort of that as an idea as it pertains to this imposter syndrome, just this need to go external for affirmation versus sort of developing whatever we need internally to do that.
I mean, it's definitely a very common thing. It's nice to get that external affirmation, right? Like, it's really nice. but developing that inner voice and that inner, trusting your own gut and your skills, and that is super important. And it's been really interesting, as an example, working with therapists who had to transition to online work suddenly now, and realizing how they felt like they couldn't trust anything anymore, and they were like feeling like it's the first day at work. I'm like, well, you're still a therapist. You've been a therapist for 20 years. You know how to do your work. It's just a little bit different. But you have your skills, you have your training, just use that. Not everything is different just because it's online, or just because it's remote, or just because, one aspect of it has changed. So having that inner kind of stability and coming back to your own, your own strengths and your skills and your training and your expertise, is really important, and definitely developing that, different. It's not just developing a positive voice, because that's something what some clients try to do, is that you have that inner critic and then you just try to have a second voice that's louder with positive stuff. And that's not even really working, because then you just have two loud voices in your head shouting all the time and fighting. But learning to listen less to your inner critic. It's not about like shutting them up. We all have that voice and we will always have it. It's more about how much attention do we pay to it, and how much do we focus on it, and how much do we engage with it. And the way I work as a therapist is a lot about like disengaging and trying to, just like, yeah, you keep talking. I'm going to focus on whatever I really want to focus on right now.
Yeah, and I think that idea of your inner critic or whatever, I mean, honestly, could be a show all by itself too. But sort of in the interest of time, and as we're starting to wind down here, I wanted to talk about a topic that's maybe a little more concrete, or maybe you can weigh in a little bit. I saw an article on your website. It made me think of this specifically because it's something which is really weird for me, but I've been struggling with during COVID. And it's this idea of getting sleep and getting proper amounts of sleep. And I imagine among a digital nomad community where people are largely in front of their laptop all day, setting boundaries, overwork, all these things are rampant in that community, also among remote workers generally. I wonder if you'd talk about sort of just the importance of sleep, and then sort of how we might, I guess, achieve a level where we're actually getting what we're supposed to.
I think there's nothing more important than sleep for our mental health. I think it's such a huge factor. And I mean, they use it as a torture thing, right? To like sleep deprive people. It's not, it's for a good reason. And you have some children, you know what it feels like when you don't get enough sleep.
Exactly.
And not just because you can't stop working, but because someone else is interfering with your sleep. And it's a huge thing for our physical and mental health. And so making that a priority is really, really important. And it's one of the things, like when I work with someone, it's one of the things you have to check first. It's sleeping and eating and, exercise and all of those basics. Because if you don't make sure that those basic needs are covered, there's no point in focusing on your inner critic. I mean, it's going to be a lot louder if you don't sleep. Let's focus on the sleep first and then see what's left once you get that a little bit better under control. And I think for people who, especially digital nomads and just entrepreneurs and people who are self-employed, it's that idea of like, I have to be available all the time. And that's so wrong. I mean, there's almost no one out there who has to be available 24/7. There are a few people, there are people on call, and there are some people who have to have that kind of job, but really most of us don't. And setting those boundaries for self and realizing that nothing bad's going to happen if you don't answer your phone for 24 hours or 10 hours or 7 hours of sleep. And those notifications and having that constant, being connected. I know so many digital nomads who love it when they're on a plane for a longer ride and they're like, and I hope there's no Wi-Fi because this is like where I get to not be connected. And you can create that yourself. But it's such a hard thing to do for yourself, but really, really important. And that's where like sleep also, like shutting off your computer a while before you go to sleep, turning off your phone, not being, not having your phone in your bed with you first thing in the morning, not like all of those things. And I think we all know them. It's not like I need to explain to anyone out there what you should be doing. It's more about actually committing to doing it really for yourself.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know for me, I don't know what it is, but something's going on this summer. And I don't know if it's just built-in anxiety that's coming from COVID, because like in my day to day, like I'm not largely affected. Our company's always been online. I mean, we're a little slower than normal and we're not doing as much work as we normally do, that kind of thing. But I mean, generally, like I don't think it's really stress induced, but there's definitely something going on where I'm not sleeping as well as normal. And I'm finding that, just being tired all the time is problematic. It's really hindering my ability to move on projects, and, it's affecting my motivation negatively and things like that. And so I'm finding that it's a real problem. So I'm a true believer on that sleep stuff. And also, I've been trying to understand more generally, as we know, I'm not an expert in this field at all, but I think that there's this idea, this inclination that when we're suffering from mental health issues, our brain is sort of acting autonomously, that it's this little thing that floats out there, and sometimes things go wrong in our little brain. But we don't necessarily think about how, sort of our maybe our digestive health or our respiratory health or our, whatever else is factoring into the way that our brain is behaving. And so, so I am trying to explore that stuff a little bit more and understand just sort of, whole body health as it pertains to mental health versus just, mental health.
I'm curious, did you notice at the beginning of the pandemic that you slept better than you expected?
I mean, I would say, I don't know about better than I've expected. Like for me, I'm my whole life, I've been a great sleeper. Like I'm a big fan. And so, so generally speaking, but what I will say, what happened to me, and maybe this is maybe what you're trying to allude to. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was still very much routine driven. And for me, it's really important to have sort of a daily routine, and I still do. But I noticed the longer the pandemic sort of went on, and the more that I was working at home, especially I always joke that my biggest problem was my new coworkers, because I had my sons and my wife here. And so, I noticed that what used to be sort of a habitual day for me, where I would get up, get ready, do some reading, do some studying, do some, get right into work, spend my day, break for lunch, like I had this sort of structure that I would follow. Now it's, okay, well, the kids have to finish this, and then we can do lunch, and then blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of all this stuff, right? And then I also noticed my wife is an educator, and she went online. And so she was, teaching from 8 a.m. till like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, just to keep up with her kids, and then taking texts and emails and stuff all the way until midnight or 1 a.m. And so what I noticed was that our rigid structure that I still had at the beginning of the pandemic, by like June, by the time school got out, that was in total chaos, right? I was still getting up at the same time and still doing all my pieces and parts, but I went from, actively pushing to go to bed at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night to, now getting to bed at 11 or 12 or 1, yet still getting up, so I was demanding more of myself and not that. So I guess to answer your question, I mean, yes, I probably was sleeping better at the beginning. I think more for the reasons you're describing about boundary setting, at 5 o'clock, I still punched out. I still did that stuff. I left, but now those lines have become a little blurrier. And so I think that could be part of it too. Just life's gotten more chaotic.
Yeah, it's definitely, for many people, it's gotten worse over time. And I think we're just starting to see the mental health implications of all of this. But more than just the routine aspect that you were just mentioning, I also noticed with some of my clients and digital nomad friends is that kind of like having, especially if you were in a place where there was a strict lockdown, having that freedom taken away from you was really, anxiety inducing and difficult. But at the same time, it also gave you that kind of like, well, I guess I'm stuck here now, so I don't have to decide anything. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to plan the next thing. So I'm just going to try to be here. And that, for a lot of people, for a while, did actually improve their sleep and, their patterns, because they were just like, there's nothing I can do right now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was talking to a guy yesterday. He's actually a weight loss therapist, but he was talking about this, this idea or this concept that we only have so much bandwidth for making decisions on any given day. And so if we're making a gazillion decisions every single day, like obviously we're going to get tired, we're going to get worn down. Where, the fewer decisions we have to make, in his case, it was as it pertains to the meals you're choosing and your diet and that sort of stuff. But, I think in general, as applied to remote work or really anything, the fewer decisions that you have to make, if you can make good, solid decisions, you're not wishy-washy, and then you're reducing the number of decisions, it seems like you might be in a better position. So I'm sure, eliminating that from the digital nomad's day, not having to plan where they're going and find a place to stay and all this and that, I'm sure has been of benefit to them.
Yeah, so, I've started traveling. I started traveling again like 5 or 6 weeks ago now myself. And I was so ready to leave, and I was really looking forward to being on the road again, and it was really, really good, and it is, and I'm really like, this is the best thing I did for my mental health. And luckily I was in a place, in a country where I can do this right now, and there are ways to do it in a safe way. But then, because we hadn't traveled in so long, we're like, well, let's use this, like a week here, a week there. Usually I stay at least a month or two somewhere. And after a while I was like, well, I have already to plan the next thing, but I'm still here. But then there's 3 other Airbnbs already booked, and I'm kind of losing track. And then I'm spending a whole day trying to find the perfect Airbnb. And it was a really good reminder of how stressful it is to do that kind of like constant traveling and constant being on the move, and then adding like, and also making sure it's safe, and, we can actually keep doing it, and how are we doing it. And
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. Well, so I think we've sort of come to the end of our hour, as we do in the therapist's office, virtually or otherwise. And so I wondered if you would just sort of let our listeners know where they can track you down, how they can get in touch, and where they can find you online.
Sure, I've got a website in French, German, and English. The most content is in German, so if you speak German, go to the German version of it. But it's also in English and French, and that's my name, Sonia-Jaeger.com. And I'm pretty much everywhere at Dr. Sonia Jaeger.
Okay.
Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Perfect. Whatever.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to include all those notes all those links and everything in the show notes, so people will be able to track you down. If
people do speak German, I've got a podcast about the reality of digital nomad life, trying to demystify that kind of like, looking behind the fancy Instagram picture, which, like you said, we started launching it. We launched it in February. So like we had a few episodes, and we recorded all of the episodes in November. So that was kind of interesting, talking about like how we live as digital nomads. And then obviously we added like an extra episode and changed a few things. And I also co-founded a community for location independent therapists. That's what it's called, locationindependenttherapists.com. Where therapists can connect with us and join our community, but also clients can find a therapist who understands the lifestyle.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate having had the opportunity to meet you, for one, and two, to get some insight on these ideas. I think they're really useful for our community and for the remote working community at large. So thanks so much, and to everybody who watches, and tunes in this week, every week. I'm really grateful for all that. And we'll see you all next time.
I don't owe you anything. I don't know you.